Move your car. That was the first thing my mother said after opening the front door. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask whether the deployment had gone safely. She looked past me toward the driveway. Julianne hired a photographer. That old sedan doesn't belong in the pictures. Park behind the tool shed where nobody can see it. I stood there for a second, with my overnight bag still hanging from my shoulder. I just drove almost 600 miles. And you'll survive another 30 yards, she replied. Don't track mud through the foyer. So I turned around, climbed back into my 12-year-old Ford Fusion, and eased it into the muddy service lane behind the estate. My rear tire spun twice before catching enough gravel to climb the slope. The passenger door still rattled from a convoy accident overseas that Army maintenance had deemed cosmetic. I never bothered fixing it. A loose door didn't stop supplies from reaching wounded soldiers. Image mattered more than function inside my parents' house. That had always been true. When I finally walked through the kitchen entrance, 2 catering assistants squeezed past me carrying trays of crab cakes. One asked if I worked for the venue. I almost laughed. I wish, I said. The dining room looked like a bank lobby decorated for a magazine shoot. Fresh white orchids covered the center table. Crystal glasses reflected the chandelier. My father sat at the far end with a leather checkbook opened in front of him while my younger sister, Julianne, practically vibrated with excitement. The amount written across the check caught my eye before I could stop myself. 500,000. My father carefully underlined the numbers with his expensive fountain pen. There, he said. That's how real investments are made. Julianne wrapped both arms around his neck. I knew you'd believe in me. Of course I do. Her luxury wedding planning company had been open barely 3 years. I knew enough from public business filings to see trouble long before anyone admitted it. Vendor lawsuits, late tax payments, 3 office relocations in 18 months. Yet somehow everyone around this table talked as if she were building the next Fortune 500 company. Meanwhile, I had spent the last 5 years helping develop automated logistics systems that kept military hospitals supplied during combat operations. Apparently, ribbon centerpieces carried more prestige. Nobody noticed I had walked into the room until my mother glanced over. Oh, Corinne's here. That was my introduction. No hug, no smile, no welcome home. Just an announcement with all the excitement of noticing another chair. One of the caterers whispered, "Should I bring another place setting?" My mother shook her head. "She can eat later." I set my duffel beside the wall. It's fine. It wasn't fine. But arguing never changed anything inside this house. I watched Julianne show everyone architectural drawings of a larger showroom she wanted to lease downtown. The monthly payment is only $18,740, she said confidently. We'll make that back during spring wedding season. Only, I mentally calculated the operating costs before she finished talking. Insurance, payroll, utilities, commercial rent, marketing. Her numbers depended on everything going perfectly. Business almost never worked that way. My father noticed me studying the paperwork. You probably wouldn't understand private investment. I looked at him. I understand balance sheets. He smiled without humor. Government balance sheets. There it was again. The family joke. Captain Corinne Westbrook, the government's paper pusher. Nobody here cared that my assignment involved coordinating supply networks across multiple operational theaters or evaluating financial threats to defense logistics. They heard Army Logistics Command and imagined someone alphabetizing boxes. I stopped correcting them years ago. My mother adjusted Julianne's necklace. People like your sister create jobs. That's what grows communities. I almost asked how many jobs disappeared when businesses filed bankruptcy. Instead, I picked up a glass of water. The silence suited me better. As conversations drifted around the room, my attention landed on a worn brass key resting beside my father's leather planner. Most people would have overlooked it. I didn't. Grandfather Alistair had carried that exact key on every Army uniform he ever owned. He once placed it in my hand and told me, "One day this key opens something that belongs to your future, not your past." After he died, the key disappeared. Now it had quietly returned. My father noticed me staring and slid it into his jacket pocket without saying a word. That simple movement bothered me far more than the $500,000 check, because I knew exactly what the key represented, or at least I thought I did. If I was right, everything happening inside this room was only the surface of a much larger story. I decided not to ask, not yet. The answer would come eventually. When it did, nobody sitting at this table would be celebrating. Outside, more guests arrived. Luxury SUVs lined the circular drive, local investors, county officials, country club friends, people who judged success by zip codes and golf memberships. My mother hurried toward the entrance. "Everyone, remember," she called. "The photographer starts taking family pictures in 15 minutes. She stopped beside me. "You stay off to the side unless someone asks." I wasn't planning on being in the pictures. Good. She smiled as if we had reached a pleasant agreement. The photographer directed everyone into position around the fireplace. Julianne stood proudly between my parents. I remained near the hallway beside two servers carrying champagne. One guest leaned toward me. "Are you security?" I answered with a straight face. "Something like that." He laughed. I didn't. After the photos, my father tapped a spoon against his glass. "I'd like everyone's attention." The room quieted. He lifted the check high enough for dozens of guests to admire it. "My daughter Julianne represents everything this family believes in." Applause echoed across the room. He handed her the check. She accepted it like a championship trophy. Then my father looked toward me. Without standing up, he reached into a bread basket, grabbed a dry dinner roll, and tossed it across the room. It landed against my jacket before dropping into my hands. A few uncomfortable chuckles broke out. My father shrugged. Those who choose a low-level clerk job in the government shouldn't expect to feast on family wealth. More laughter followed. I looked down at the hard dinner roll resting in my palm. Nobody in that room realized they had just insulted an army captain trusted with projects far beyond anything they could imagine. And none of them had the slightest idea that the old brass key hidden inside my father's pocket was worth far more than the check everyone was applauding. I closed my fingers around the dinner roll before anyone could mistake my silence for surrender. A few guests avoided eye contact as they drifted toward the ballroom. Others congratulated Julianne again, as though $500,000 had magically turned a failing business into a success story. I slipped the untouched roll onto a side table and walked toward my father. "Dad, I need 10 minutes. He barely looked at me. "I'm entertaining." "It concerns Grandpa Alistair's trust." That got his attention. His expression changed for only a second before returning to its usual confidence. "We'll talk in my study." The room smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. Every shelf was lined with framed awards from local business associations, photos of ribbon cuttings, and expensive decanters that nobody actually drank from. My grandfather's military portrait hung on the far wall, pressed uniform, rows of medals, steady eyes. It was the only honest thing in the room. My father closed the door behind us. "Well," I set a navy blue document folder on his desk. "I need your signature on 2 standard release forms." He didn't touch them. "For what?" "The Alistair Westbrook Defense Research Trust." His jaw tightened. I thought that issue was finished. It isn't. I opened the folder and placed the first document in front of him. My grandfather established a restricted research trust worth $20 million. The funds aren't personal inheritance. They're legally reserved for military medical logistics research. He leaned back without reading a single line. "I know what the trust is." "Then you know these forms don't transfer ownership." Silence. "They simply authorize the trustee to release the funding according to Grandpa's instructions." My father rotated the heavy gold signet ring on his finger, something he always did when he was deciding how much patience to pretend to have. "And this research? It's an AI-driven automated triage and medical supply allocation system." He frowned, in English. "It predicts where medical supplies need to be before shortages happen. During combat operations, minutes matter. Blood products, surgical kits, ventilators, antibiotics. They can't wait until someone notices inventory is running low." He folded his arms. "So software. It's much more than software." I kept my voice calm. "For the last 5 years, I've worked with military logistics specialists, field hospitals, procurement analysts, and defense researchers. The system continuously evaluates casualty projections, transportation routes, inventory levels, weather disruptions, infrastructure damage, and available aircraft." He stared at me. "It helps medics receive what they need before they ask." I slid another document across the desk. The prototype reduced emergency supply delays by 28% during controlled operational testing. Still nothing. The trust exists because Grandpa believed military medicine needed better logistics. My father finally glanced at the paperwork. "I don't see why $20 million needs your name attached to it." "It doesn't," I answered immediately. The trust remains independent. Every expenditure is federally audited. I can't withdraw money for myself even if I wanted to. He tapped the folder with one finger. So what exactly do you gain? The ability to finish something that saves lives. His laugh was short. That's not an answer. It is mine. Before he could respond, the study door opened without knocking. My mother stepped inside, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. I thought this meeting would be over. It almost is, my father said. She looked down at the documents. Oh, those papers again. They require both of your signatures. She sighed dramatically. Corinne, can't this wait? No. The guests are here. This has waited nearly 8 months. My mother placed the glasses on the desk. I still don't understand why the government can't pay for government projects. It already does. I pointed to the release form. This trust was written into Grandpa's estate specifically to partner with Department of Defense research. Everything follows federal compliance requirements. She exchanged a glance with my father. I think your grandfather expected someone else to manage it. My grandfather appointed me. He appointed you years ago. Yes, before he realized how different life would become. I almost smiled. Grandpa had retired as a 4-star general. He understood military service better than anyone in this family. Nothing about my career would have surprised him. I turned another page toward them. The trustee is waiting for these signatures. My father didn't even pretend to read it. Instead, he stood, walked toward the portrait of Grandpa Alistair, and looked at it for several seconds. You know what your problem is? I stayed quiet. You've confused duty with importance. He faced me. You wear a uniform and suddenly believe Washington knows better than your own family. This isn't about Washington. It never is with bureaucrats. I exhaled slowly. Dad, these are standard legal releases. I said no. You haven't even looked at them. I don't need to. He picked up the folder, flipped through several pages without reading, then dropped it back onto the desk. I will not sign away family legacy so you can waste it on useless military paperwork. The words landed harder than the dinner roll had. This isn't family money. It became family money when my father died. That's not how. The trust is written. I don't care. For the first time that evening, I felt anger pushing against years of discipline. I forced it back down. My grandfather wrote clear instructions, so did I. He reached into his pocket and removed the brass key I had noticed earlier. Without another word, he crossed the room to a large walnut cabinet built into the wall. Hidden behind framed photographs was a reinforced steel safe. He entered a 6-digit combination. The heavy door clicked open. Inside sat several document boxes, neatly labeled. He placed my folder inside one of them. Then he added another thick envelope tied with faded military green ribbon. Before closing the safe, he looked directly at me. As long as those papers stay in here, nothing happens. The steel door slammed shut. The locking bolts engaged with a deep metallic thud. He slowly spun the brass key between his fingers before sliding it back into his pocket. There, he smiled. Problem solved. I looked at the safe for several seconds. The trust documents were locked away, so was whatever else my grandfather had left inside that steel box. And for the first time since walking into this house, I realized this was never about a signature. It was about control. I kept my face still as I walked upstairs, because giving my father the satisfaction of seeing me angry would have been his favorite ending to the conversation. The guest room hadn't changed much since college. Same oak dresser, same faded quilt my grandmother had sewn decades earlier. The only new addition was a decorative basket filled with miniature bottles of water, each wrapped with a custom label that read, Julianne's next chapter. Everything in this house had become part of her celebration. I set my duffel on the luggage rack and loosened my collar. My phone buzzed twice. One message came from my executive officer. Status check. Confirm arrival. I typed back. Safe. Personal matter delayed longer than expected. Available if needed. His reply came less than a minute later. Roger. Travel safe. Short. Professional. No drama. Sometimes the army felt more like family than the people downstairs. A knock landed on the door. Before I answered, it opened anyway. Julianne stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio and a glass of white wine. I figured you'd be hiding up here. I'm not hiding. She closed the door behind her. No, you're regrouping. That's what soldiers call it. She smiled at her own joke. I didn't. What do you want? She sat in the chair across from me like she owned the room. I want us to help each other. I've heard that sentence before. And every time you assume I'm trying to manipulate you. Because you usually are. She laughed softly. I've missed your optimism. She placed the leather portfolio on my lap. Open it. Inside sat a professionally prepared legal packet. The cover page immediately caught my attention. Irrevocable transfer of beneficial interest. My eyes moved lower. The property description matched my grandfather's land trust. 248 acres outside Columbus. The land had never been developed. Grandpa used to call it the one thing nobody gets to waste. I looked back at Julianne. This isn't funny. I know. You want me to transfer my interest. I want you to sign. My 50%. Exactly. I closed the folder. No, she didn't seem surprised. You didn't read everything. I read enough. You always do that. No, I set the portfolio on the bed between us. I recognized legal language. She crossed one leg over the other. You realize the property isn't doing anything. It isn't supposed to. For who? She leaned forward. My business. There it was. I need liquidity. I thought Dad just gave you $500,000. Expansion costs more than that. I stared at her. You burned through $500,000 before depositing the check? She rolled her eyes. You have no idea how premium event businesses operate. I know how debt operates. Her smile disappeared. My investors need reassurance. So this is about lenders. It's about growth. No, I shook my head. It's about cash flow. She looked away for the first time. That tiny hesitation confirmed what I had suspected downstairs. The business wasn't expanding. It was bleeding. How much do you owe? She didn't answer. Julianne, still nothing. I asked a simple question. She picked up her wine instead. It isn't your concern. It became my concern when you asked me to sign away family property. She slowly placed the glass back on the table. The number hung in the room. I blinked once. Personal guarantees? She nodded. Vadorn loans, private financing. Another nod. Equipment leases. And? She looked irritated. A bridge loan. For how much? $940,000. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly the kind of financial structure that collapsed without constant new revenue. You don't need expansion, I said it quietly. You need rescue. I need family. You already received family. She frowned. You're unbelievable. I'm realistic. I pointed toward the folder. Grandpa protected that land for a reason. She stood. He protected opportunity. He protected discipline. She walked closer until she stood over me. You know what your biggest flaw is? I've heard several opinions tonight. You still think Grandpa loved you more. This has nothing to do with love. It has everything to do with it. She grabbed the folder and opened it again. Sign the transfer. No, Corin, no. This is your last chance to be useful. I couldn't help smiling. I've been useful my entire adult life. Not to this family. I looked directly into her eyes. I've paid Mom's medical bills. She looked away. I covered Dad's property tax shortage 3 years ago. Silence. I wired you $22,000 when your first event venue backed out. She folded her arms. You said that was a loan. It was. You never asked for repayment. I knew you couldn't. Her face hardened. I don't owe you gratitude. I never asked for it. The room became very quiet. Then Julianne reached into her handbag. She removed a sealed manila envelope. I hoped we wouldn't need this. She slid it across the bed. Inside was what appeared to be an official military medical report. The formatting looked convincing at first glance. Defense Health Agency logo, medical evaluation codes, clinical terminology. But within seconds I spotted inconsistencies. The document number format was wrong. The signature block used an outdated title. Someone had copied portions from publicly available templates. I looked up slowly. This is fake. She smiled. It only has to look real. I felt something cold settle inside my chest. You forged a federal medical record. I created a document. You committed a felony. She ignored that. I also have a friend who knows 2 reporters at the Franklin County Journal. I stared at her without speaking. She lowered her voice until it was barely above a whisper. If you refuse to sign the transfer, they'll receive copies tomorrow. She stepped closer. The story won't say you're dishonest. Another step. It'll say the Army quietly discharged you after psychological instability. She watched my face carefully. It'll ask whether someone with documented mental health concerns should ever have been trusted with military logistics. I didn't move, she continued. Nobody reads corrections. Her voice remained calm. They only remember headlines. I knew exactly how dangerous false allegations could be, not because they were always believed, because every security clearance review, every contracting authority, every promotion board, and every classified access renewal required questions to be answered. Even a fabricated report could force months of investigation. Months that could destroy the research program I'd spent 5 years building. Julianne leaned close enough that only I could hear her final sentence. Sign the transfer, or I'll make the country wonder whether Captain Corinne Westbrook ever belonged in uniform at all. I waited until the guest's room door clicked shut before letting myself breathe again. Julianne's footsteps faded down the hallway. 1, 2, 3. I stood perfectly still beside the bed. Years earlier, during survival training, an instructor had told us something that sounded almost ridiculous at the time. Your body will panic before your brain does. Train your breathing first, and your judgment will survive. I squared my shoulders. 4 seconds in. Hold for 4. 4 seconds out. Hold again. Box breathing. The tremor in my right hand eased by the 3rd cycle. By the 5th, my pulse had slowed enough that I could think instead of react. That was the difference between professionals and amateurs. Professionals understood that anger was expensive. I picked up the forged medical report one more time. It was convincing enough to fool someone unfamiliar with military paperwork. The fake medical codes. The copied Defense Health Agency seal. The fabricated recommendation for psychiatric separation. To a local newspaper, it would probably look authentic. To an Army investigator, it would fall apart within minutes. That wasn't the problem. The problem was timing. Once a false story entered the public record, every defense contractor associated with my research would receive phone calls. Congressional staffers asked questions. Procurement offices paused approvals. Legal departments became cautious. A lie didn't have to win. Sometimes it only had to delay the truth. 5 years of work could disappear under months of unnecessary reviews. I folded the forged report and placed it back inside the envelope. Not because I intended to keep it, because it had just become evidence. I walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The party had grown larger. String lights stretched across the lawn. A jazz trio played near the patio. Valet attendants parked another line of luxury SUVs, while servers carried trays between clusters of guests laughing beneath heated tents. From up here, everything looked perfect. Nobody outside knew that 1 floor above them, a federal officer had just been threatened with extortion involving classified defense work. I reached beneath the false bottom of my duffel bag. Most people would have seen an ordinary padded electronics case. Inside rested a rugged military satellite tablet issued through a restricted defense research program. No commercial manufacturer sold it. No civilian operating system powered it. The casing showed scratches from years of travel through airfields, command centers, and temporary operations bases across 3 continents. I placed it on the desk. The screen remained black until it recognized my fingerprint. Identity confirmed. A second scan requested retinal verification. I leaned forward, the device unlocked. Instead of colorful application icons, a simple encrypted interface appeared. Every function required authentication. Every action generated an audit trail. Nothing disappeared. Nothing could be quietly erased. I connected the compact satellite antenna and positioned it beside the window. Signal strength climbed, encrypted channel available. I paused for 1 moment, not because I doubted myself, because I understood exactly what came next. Military reporting wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't an emotional reaction to family conflict. Every officer learns the same principle early in their career. When federal assets are threatened, you report. When protected research is compromised, you report. When coercion targets national defense work, you report. Personal relationships never change those obligations. I selected the secure reporting portal. A warning appeared. Unauthorized submissions constitute a federal offense. I entered my credentials. The system opened a structured incident report. Reporting Officer Captain Corinne Westbrook. Verified Program Affiliation Advanced Military Medical Logistics Initiative. Verified Funding Status Pending Trust Release Authorization. Verified. The cursor waited beneath the incident classification menu. I didn't hesitate. Active service asset intercepted next field. Nature of incident, I typed carefully. Restricted defense research funding intentionally obstructed by unauthorized private parties. Attempted coercion involving federally protected intellectual property. Credible threat of fabricated medical documentation intended to interfere with active military research responsibilities. Every sentence remained factual. No exaggeration, no emotional language. Only observable events. I attached digital copies of the forged medical report, Then I photographed the unsigned trust release forms still lying inside my folder. Next came my written statement regarding the conversation inside my father's study, his refusal, his admission that he intentionally locked the trust documents away, his declaration that he would prevent the project from moving forward. Everything was documented exactly as it happened. The system prompted another question. Has protected intellectual property been placed at elevated risk? I selected yes. Another screen opened immediately. Has an active service member been subjected to coercion affecting federal defense interests? Again, yes. The tablet requested voice confirmation. I spoke clearly. This statement is true to the best of my knowledge. I understand that knowingly providing false information violates federal law. Voice print accepted. The final authorization page appeared. Most incident reports ended there. This one contained one additional option rarely used outside critical research programs. Emergency complaints override beneath it sat a single authorization category. Active service asset intercepted. Federal defense intellectual property compromised. I looked at those words for several seconds. Activating that protocol meant the matter would leave my hands. It would no longer be a disagreement between relatives. It would become an official federal compliance issue reviewed through Department of Defense channels. My parents would never see it coming. Julianne certainly wouldn't. Downstairs, someone started applauding another toast. Laughter floated through the open window. My mother was probably introducing another investor. My father was probably explaining how proud he was of Julianne's future. Nobody in the backyard realized their evening had already begun to change. I rested my finger on the confirmation field. Then I pressed it. The tablet paused. A second. 2. The screen suddenly dimmed. A bright red security banner expanded across the display. Pentagon compliance protocol initiated secure channel. Sealed priority review activated the satellite indicator locked into an encrypted connection. Transmission complete. No alarms sounded inside the house. No lights flickered. No one downstairs stopped talking. The jazz trio continued playing. Champagne glasses still clinked together. Guests kept laughing as if nothing had happened. But somewhere far beyond my parents' estate, inside a secure federal network, the first notification had already reached the people whose job was to protect military programs exactly like mine. And unlike everyone celebrating downstairs, they never ignored a red screen. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked downstairs the following evening, knowing exactly what I had done and exactly what I could no longer undo. The Westbrook estate barely resembled the house I'd entered the day before. The front lawn had been transformed into an upscale fundraising gala for Julianne's expansion initiative. White tents stretched across the gardens. Valet attendants in black coats directed imported luxury cars toward temporary parking. A string quartet performed near the fountain, while waiters circulated with silver trays carrying filet medallions, lobster bites, and champagne that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My father loved calling these events investments. They were really advertisements. Every conversation was meant to convince someone that success had already happened. Inside the ballroom, banners displayed Julianne's company logo beside the slogan, "Creating Perfect Beginnings." I almost smiled. Some of the floral arrangements still carried inventory tags tucked beneath the ribbons. Whoever supplied the decorations had been rushing. I recognized another small detail. 3 centerpieces had identical orchids positioned the same way. Professional designers rarely repeated arrangements exactly. That usually happened when replacements were assembled at the last minute. Someone had canceled. Julianne's business looked polished from a distance. Up close, I could see the cracks. A young event coordinator approached me holding a clipboard. "Excuse me," she said. "The family section is up front." "I know." She hesitated. I was actually told to ask whether you're helping the catering staff. Before I answered, my mother appeared. "No, she's with us." The coordinator looked relieved. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "It's understandable," my mother replied. Corinne prefers blending into the background. She turned toward me with a practiced smile. "You'll be standing near the service entrance tonight. I'm a guest." "Exactly." Her smile never moved. "So please don't make yourself the center of attention." She guided me across the ballroom before I could answer. The spot she chose was beside the swinging kitchen doors where servers entered carrying food. From there, I had an unobstructed view of the entire room. I also looked remarkably similar to hotel staff. Perhaps that was intentional. One waiter leaned toward me. If you need a break, we're rotating every 30 minutes. I couldn't help laughing. I don't work here. He blinked. My mistake. No offense taken. He looked embarrassed. Honestly, you seem more relaxed than most of the guests. I probably am. He grinned before disappearing back into the kitchen. At least one conversation that evening felt normal. The ballroom gradually filled with local business owners, investment advisors, attorneys, elected officials, and several television personalities from Columbus. Every introduction sounded nearly identical. So good to see you. We should have lunch. Let's definitely connect next week. Nobody meant it. I recognized the performance because military conferences had their own version. Different uniforms, same rehearsed conversations. Julianne moved gracefully from table to table, thanking donors for supporting what she called the next generation of luxury event experiences. I overheard one investor ask about projected revenue. She answered with confidence. We're forecasting a 42% increase, no supporting documents, no explanation, just confidence. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was expensive. As I watched the room, my phone vibrated once. No sound, just a single secure notification. Federal submission received. Nothing more, no names, no instructions. Exactly what I expected. The process had begun. I locked the screen before anyone nearby noticed. About 30 minutes later, my father stepped onto the small stage positioned beneath the crystal chandelier. He tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the conversations faded. Thank you for believing in vision. Polite applause followed. He spent several minutes praising Julianne's creativity, leadership, and entrepreneurial courage. Listening carefully, I realized he never mentioned actual financial performance. Only ambition. Then my mother joined him. She loved microphones. And of course, she said with a bright laugh, our family has always believed everyone contributes in different ways. I had heard that sentence before. It usually meant trouble. She scanned the room until she found me standing beside the service doors. There she is. Several heads turned. Our oldest daughter, Corinne. People smiled politely. My mother continued. She's chosen a much quieter career. A few guests nodded. She works one of those government office jobs where paperwork never seems to end. Light laughter spread through the ballroom. I stayed exactly where I was. My mother wasn't finished. I always tell people every family needs someone willing to answer phones and organize filing cabinets. More laughter. My father joined in. She's basically a glorified government receptionist. The room responded right on cue. Some guests laughed because they believed the joke. Others laughed because powerful people were laughing. One county commissioner actually wiped tears from his eyes. I recognized that type immediately. The safest laugh in politics is someone else's. A woman standing near me leaned over. Is that really what you do? I nod exactly. What do you actually handle? Supply chains. Oh, she smiled so kindly. Like warehouses? Sometimes. She nodded, apparently satisfied. There wasn't much point explaining automated casualty forecasting or operational logistics algorithms during cocktail reception. The truth sounded less believable than my mother's version. Across the ballroom, Julianne lifted a champagne glass toward me with a satisfied little smile. She thought she had already won. She believed humiliation was leverage. She had no idea that somewhere beyond Ohio, people with security clearances were already reading her threats, word for word. As another wave of laughter rolled through the ballroom, I found myself thinking about a different family story we covered not long ago. One that started with public humiliation and ended in a way nobody in that room could have predicted. If you're watching between minutes 45 and 55, keep an eye on the top right corner of your screen. That case is worth your time because it is surprisingly familiar. My mother raised her glass one more time. Here's to children who actually know how to create wealth. Crystal glasses lifted across the room. The string quartet continued playing a soft Mozart arrangement. Then something changed. At first, I thought a delivery truck had pulled into the driveway. A faint vibration traveled through the polished hardwood floor, barely noticeable. Several wine glasses trembled almost imperceptibly. The musicians kept playing. The vibration returned, longer this time, lower. The chandelier swayed just enough for the hanging crystals to tap against one another. Someone frowned. A waiter instinctively steadied a tray of champagne flutes. Another deep pulse rolled through the estate. The heavy crystal goblets on the nearest tables began to rattle against the white linen. The string quartet stopped playing in the middle of a measure. Conversations died away one by one. Every face in the ballroom turned toward the front entrance. Nobody laughed anymore. I stayed where I was while everyone else instinctively looked toward the windows. The vibration grew stronger, not random, rhythmic. Anyone who had spent enough time around military aviation recognized it before the sound fully arrived. Rotor blades. Outside, silk tablecloths snapped upward so hard that several place settings slid across the patio. White napkins lifted into the air like startled birds. One of the towering floral arrangements tipped over, scattering white roses across the stone walkway. Guests rushed toward the ballroom windows. What is that? Construction equipment. Is there an accident nearby? The low-frequency rumble deepened until conversations became almost impossible without raising your voice. My father frowned. This can't be happening here. The estate sat on enough acreage that helicopters occasionally crossed the area on their way to military installations farther east. They never came this low. One of the catering managers hurried inside from the patio. We've got aircraft coming straight toward the property. My mother laughed nervously. Don't be ridiculous. I'm serious. Another employee pushed through the service entrance. They're almost overhead. People abandoned their champagne glasses and crowded toward the windows. I didn't move. I already knew the compliance report had reached someone. I simply didn't know how quickly they would respond. Apparently, the answer was faster than even I expected. The ballroom lights flickered slightly as shadows swept across the ceiling. 3 of them, large. Even before I saw them through the glass, I could estimate their size from the rotor wash alone. Someone near the front gasped, "Oh my God." The slate-gray helicopters emerged above the tree line one after another, flying in disciplined formation. Their navigation lights flashed through the evening sky. No television news helicopter flew like that. No sightseeing company-owned aircraft painted that color. Every movement was deliberate. Every turn matched the others perfectly. The first aircraft descended toward the front lawn. The second positioned itself several hundred feet away. The third circled once before settling behind them. Grass, leaves, and loose gravel exploded outward beneath the rotor wash. Silk table runners whipped completely off the outdoor buffet tables. Several expensive centerpieces rolled across the lawn. One decorative arch Julianne had rented for photographs collapsed sideways into the hedges. A guest shouted over the noise. "Whose helicopters are those?" Nobody answered. The aircraft engines continued thundering. Valet attendants abandoned the luxury cars and ran for cover. 2 photographers held onto their camera tripods as the wind threatened to flip them over. My father stormed toward the front entrance. "This is private property." Nobody could hear him. The helicopters finished landing with remarkable precision. The rotors continued spinning. Through the ballroom windows, I watched side doors slide open almost simultaneously. Uniformed personnel stepped onto the lawn, not hurried, not aggressive, disciplined. Every movement followed procedure. Several guests began pulling out their phones. Within seconds, dozens of cameras pointed toward the windows. Someone whispered behind me, "Is this some kind of military fundraiser?" "No," another voice answered. "I don't think so." My mother turned toward me for the first time since the helicopters appeared. "Corinne." I met her eyes. "Do you know anything about this?" "I know those aren't here by accident." She didn't like that answer. "What does that mean?" "I don't know yet." Technically, it wasn't a lie. I knew why they might be here. I didn't know who had been sent. Outside, uniformed military police established a controlled perimeter around the landing zone. They weren't pointing weapons at anyone. They didn't need to. Their presence alone changed the atmosphere. 2 black federal SUVs entered through the estate gates immediately after the helicopters landed. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet efficiency. They rolled across the circular driveway and stopped near the front steps. Men and women wearing dark business suits stepped out carrying locked aluminum document cases instead of tactical gear. I recognized the type instantly. Auditors, compliance specialists, legal officers. Exactly the people who appeared after operational reports triggered federal review. One local investor, standing beside my father, forced a laugh. "Franklin, you've really outdone yourself." Nobody joined him. The joke landed badly, because nobody laughed anymore. Julianne's face had lost all its color. She looked from the helicopters to me, then back again. For the first time since I'd arrived at the estate, uncertainty replaced confidence. She walked toward me, called someone. I filed a report. Her eyes widened. What report? The truthful kind. She grabbed my arm. What did you tell them? I gently removed her hand. Exactly what happened. She stared at me as though trying to calculate whether I was bluffing. Before she could speak again, the sound outside changed. The rotor speed gradually decreased. The engines settled into a lower idle. That meant the passengers had already disembarked. The front doors of the estate remained closed for only another few seconds. Inside the ballroom, nobody spoke. Even the catering staff had stopped working. The silence felt heavier than the rotor noise. Then came 3 sharp knocks, not loud, not impatient. 3 deliberate knocks from someone who already expected the door to open. No one moved. The butler looked toward my father. My father straightened his jacket. I'll handle this. He walked confidently across the marble foyer. Years of local influence had taught him that every unexpected visitor could be managed through status, reputation, or connections. He reached the entrance and pulled open both massive wooden doors. Cold air rushed inside. Standing on the front steps was a tall army officer wearing dress uniform, with the single star of a brigadier general on each shoulder. Rows of combat ribbons covered his chest. Behind him stood 2 military police officers. Behind them waited 4 federal compliance auditors carrying secured document cases. The general's eyes swept across the ballroom once before settling on me. Recognition appeared immediately. So did respect. Captain Westbrook. His voice carried through the silent room without effort. Good evening. I drew attention automatically. Good evening, General Crawford. Every guest turned toward me. Several mouths literally fell open. Franklin looked from my salute to the general's insignia, suddenly unsure of himself. I'm Franklin Westbrook. My father interrupted. This is my home. There must be some misunderstanding. General Thaddeus Crawford didn't even look at him. His attention never left me. Captain, he said evenly, we've received your priority defense compliance submission. He stepped across the threshold. The military police and federal auditors followed him into the estate. The gala stopped existing in that single moment. I lowered my salute only after General Crawford returned it. The room remained perfectly still. A few seconds earlier, everyone had been admiring Julian's fundraising gala. Now more than 100 guests stood frozen, trying to understand why a brigadier general had walked into a private estate with military police and federal auditors. General Crawford removed a slim leather portfolio from beneath his arm. Captain Westbrook, are you safe? Yes, sir. Have any physical threats occurred since your report was transmitted? No, sir. Has anyone attempted to confiscate government property? No, sir. Has the attempted coercion stopped? No, sir. His expression didn't change. I understand. Only then did my father step forward again. General, surely we can discuss whatever misunderstanding brought you here. General Crawford continued speaking to me, as though my father had remained silent. Captain, has your research material remained under your exclusive control? Yes, sir. Excellent. My father forced a polite smile. I know the county commissioners. If there's a concern involving federal paperwork, I'm certain we can resolve it privately. Nothing. General Crawford didn't even acknowledge that another person had spoken. Watching my father become invisible was almost surreal. He had spent decades believing every problem could be solved with the right handshake. Tonight, rank mattered more than reputation. One of the local investors finally whispered, "Who exactly is that?" A retired Air Force colonel standing near the back answered quietly, "That's not someone you ignore." General Crawford turned one page inside his portfolio. Captain Westbrook, your submission included documentation regarding restricted defense research. Yes, sir. It also included evidence of attempt interference with federally protected intellectual property. Yes, sir. And evidence of attempted coercion directed at an active duty Army officer. Yes. Sir? Each answer echoed through the ballroom. Every guest heard it. Several slowly turned toward Julianne. She suddenly looked very interested in the floor. My mother stepped forward. General, this is simply a family disagreement. General Crawford finally looked away from me, not toward her, toward one of the federal auditors. Please note that statement. The auditor wrote something immediately. My mother blinked. I wasn't. General Crawford resumed speaking before she finished. Sir, did your report characterize this as a domestic disagreement? No. Sir, how did you characterize it? I answered exactly as I had written it. An attempt to obstruct authorized defense research through coercion involving protected federal interests. Correct. He closed the folder. That distinction is important. My father laughed once. This has gotten completely out of proportion. He spread his hands toward the guests. My daughter works for the government. The paperwork is sitting in my safe. I'm protecting family assets. General Crawford slowly turned toward him for the first time. The ballroom became even quieter. Mr. Westbrook. My father seemed relieved that he had finally been acknowledged. Yes. Are you Captain Corinne Westbrook's commanding officer? No. Do you possess authority over Department of Defense research funding? No. Do you possess authority over federally protected intellectual property? No. General Crawford nodded once. Then your opinion regarding the operational value of her work carries no legal weight. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. My father's face reddened. You don't understand the situation. I understand it precisely. General Crawford's voice never rose. You intentionally obstructed documents associated with a restricted research trust. I own those documents. You possess physical custody. The correction came instantly. Ownership is a separate legal question. My father opened his mouth again. General Crawford continued before he could speak. You also referred to Captain Westbrook's work as useless military paperwork. I did. I appreciate the clarification. He extended his hand toward one of the compliance officers. A sealed document case was immediately placed into it. 2 security seals were broken in front of everyone. Inside rested a dark blue presentation folder embossed with the seal of the Department of Defense. Every movement was deliberate. Every procedure followed protocol. General Crawford opened the folder. Even from several feet away, I recognized multiple signatures. The final page carried raised federal certification. He looked directly at me. Captain Corinne Westbrook. Sir. Following emergency review conducted under Defense Research Continuity Authority, the Department of Defense has completed its preliminary assessment. I felt every eye in the ballroom shift toward me. General Crawford continued reading. Your automated medical logistics and AI-assisted triage allocation program has been designated a project of critical national security significance. A quiet murmur spread through the guests. Someone whispered, artificial intelligence. Another said, medical logistics? The retired Air Force colonel folded his arms and simply listened. General Crawford reached the final page. Because private interference has created an unacceptable operational risk, the Department of Defense has exercised emergency funding authority. He removed a single document bearing multiple federal seals. I am authorized to deliver this directive immediately. He handed it directly to me. The title filled nearly half the page. Pentagon Defense Appropriation Directive. Beneath it appeared the amount. 20,000. For 1 second, nobody breathed. General Crawford spoke clearly enough that every person in the ballroom heard each word. Effective immediately, the federal government has authorized direct funding of Captain Westbrook's research program. Another stunned silence. The Department of Defense has officially bypassed all private administrative obstruction associated with the original trust. My father's expression collapsed. What? General Crawford didn't slow down. The research program will proceed under federal authority. He turned another page. Captain Westbrook has been designated a critical national security asset for purposes of this initiative. The words hit the room harder than the helicopters had. A county commissioner quietly lowered his champagne glass. One television reporter stopped pretending to be a guest and began recording openly. Julianne looked at the directive as though she couldn't process the number printed on it. $20 million. Not promised. Not requested. Approved. My mother stared at me. You never worked in an office. I met her eyes. I told you I worked in logistics. General Crawford allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. Mrs. Westbrook, he said evenly. Your daughter happens to be one of the finest logistics officers I've had the privilege of evaluating. He paused just long enough for the sentence to settle over the room. And the United States government has no intention of allowing her work to be blocked. I folded the Pentagon directive carefully and slipped it back into its protective folder while the room struggled to absorb what had just happened. General Crawford turned to the lead compliance officer. Proceed. There was no hesitation. A woman in a dark navy suit stepped forward and presented another sealed packet. Federal search warrant, she announced. Authorized by the United States District Court, pursuant to evidence submitted through Defense Research Continuity Authority. She looked directly at my father. Mr. Franklin Westbrook. This warrant authorizes the immediate seizure of documents related to the Alistair Westbrook Defense Research Trust and any associated financial records relevant to the ongoing investigation. My father's confidence returned for a brief moment. You can't just search my home. The compliance officer calmly handed him the warrant. We already have judicial authorization. He scanned the first page. His expression changed. This is ridiculous. Another auditor spoke. Please cooperate. It will make the process significantly easier. I know my rights. So do we. The military police remained near the entrance without touching anyone. They weren't there to intimidate. They were there to ensure nobody interfered. General Crawford looked toward me. Captain, did you indicate the trust documents were secured inside Mr. Westbrook's study safe? Yes. Sir, thank you. The audit team headed toward the hallway. My father suddenly stepped in front of them. Nobody enters my office. The lead auditor stopped. Are you refusing execution of a federal search warrant? I said you're not going in. She didn't argue. She simply turned toward one of the military police officers. Please document the refusal. The officer removed a notebook. Before he wrote a single word, my father's attorney, who had apparently been attending the gala as a guest, hurried across the ballroom. Franklin, he spoke quietly. Move. What? You do not obstruct a federal warrant. This is my property. I know. The attorney lowered his voice further, and if you interfere, you'll create another criminal issue. For the first time all evening, someone my father respected was giving him advice he couldn't ignore. After several long seconds, he stepped aside. Fine. The audit teams entered the study. Nearly everyone in the ballroom drifted toward the open doorway, keeping a respectful distance while trying to watch. Nobody cared about Julianne's fundraiser anymore. The lead auditor examined the wall behind the framed photographs. Captain? Behind the portrait, I said. She nodded. Within moments, the hidden safe stood exposed. My father folded his arms. You don't know the combination. We don't need it. One of the investigators rolled in a compact equipment case from the SUV outside. Inside sat specialized lock bypass tools. No dramatic sparks, no movie-style explosions. Just professional equipment operated by someone who clearly did this for a living. He attached a small electronic device to the locking mechanism. The display counted through several diagnostic sequences. After less than 4 minutes, a soft click echoed through the study. The heavy door opened. One guest whispered, "That was faster than I expected." The investigator smiled politely. Most commercial safes are. The auditors photographed everything before touching a single document. Evidence markers were placed beside each storage box. Chain of custody forms appeared. Every transfer required signatures. Everything happened methodically. One investigator removed the blue trust folder. Defense Research Trust located. He handed it directly to General Crawford. The general inspected the seals. Intact. He passed it to me. Captain, your grandfather kept his records in excellent condition. He always believed paperwork mattered. General Crawford gave a slight nod. He was correct. I expected the search to end there. Instead, another auditor reached deeper into the safe. Additional financial records. She removed 3 thick binders, then another, then several expanding file folders. My father immediately spoke. Those have nothing to do with this. The lead auditor looked at the warrant. We'll determine that. She opened the first binder. Rows of corporate transactions, property transfers, wire confirmations, tax schedules. Her expression remained neutral. She flagged several pages with colored evidence tabs. Another investigator opened a folder labeled JW Premier Celebrations LLC. Julianne suddenly stiffened. That's my company. We're aware. It's private. It became relevant when stored alongside federally restricted trust documentation. She swallowed without responding. The auditors spread documents across the large conference table inside the study. Laptop computers appeared. Portable scanners began digitizing records. One forensic accountant entered numbers into specialized audit software. Less than 15 minutes passed before the first inconsistency appeared. Interesting. No one answered him. He enlarged one transaction on his monitor, Mr. Westbrook. My father remained silent. The accountant continued. This corporate tax filing reports gross annual revenue of $1.84 million. He opened another file. These bank deposits total approximately $3.27 million for this reporting period. The room became noticeably quieter. A second auditor looked through Julianne's business records. I'm seeing repeated transfers. She highlighted several pages. large payments entering the wedding company. Another investigator compared them with banking statements. No corresponding client contracts. The forensic accountant frowned. They're being routed through event invoices. Julianne stepped forward. That's normal. The auditor looked up. For wedding planning, they're consulting fees. He turned the monitor toward her. Consulting for whom? She didn't answer. The investigators kept working. Every few minutes another tab appeared. Another discrepancy. Another unexplained transfer. Then one of the auditors opened a military procurement file that clearly did not belong inside a private family safe. General Crawford immediately noticed it. Bring me that. The investigator handed it over. General Crawford reviewed the document slowly. His expression hardened. Captain. Sir, have you ever seen these grant numbers? I looked carefully. No, sir. He turned another page. Neither have I. The compliance officer beside him compared the paperwork against her database. A moment later, she looked up. These are Defense Innovation Grant identifiers. Another pause. Several are legitimate. And the others? She typed for another few seconds. They don't match the reported expenditures. The forensic accountant joined the conversation. The money appears to have been transferred into Julianne's company through multiple intermediary accounts. No one in the room spoke. The lead auditor summarized what everyone was already beginning to understand. We're looking at a documented pattern. She pointed to the growing stack of evidence. Potential corporate tax evasion. Another folder. Possible money laundering through a commercial business. Another spreadsheet. And what appears to be unauthorized diversion of federal military grant funds. Julianne's wineglass slipped from her hand. It shattered across the hardwood floor. Nobody reacted. Every eye remained fixed on the paperwork covering my father's desk. For years, my parents had believed that expensive furniture, political connections, and carefully managed appearances made them untouchable. But none of those things mattered anymore. Paper doesn't care about reputation. Numbers don't recognize social status. And page after page, the records sitting inside my father's own safe quietly stripped away every layer of protection they thought they had built. I watched the investigators organize the evidence into sealed containers, because by that point, nobody in the room was pretending this was a misunderstanding anymore. The ballroom had fallen silent. Not the polite silence people use during speeches. The kind that settles over a room when everyone realizes they're witnessing something that will be talked about for years. The lead forensic accountant closed his laptop. We've completed the preliminary review. General Crawford nodded. Summary. The accountant stood. The financial records establish probable cause supporting multiple federal violations. He read directly from his notes, repeated wire transfers designed to conceal the origin of funds. He turned a page. Corporate accounting records inconsistent with reported tax filings. Another page. Evidence suggesting the diversion of federally related grant money through privately controlled commercial accounts. He looked toward Julianne. Documentation supporting attempted financial concealment through Westbrook premier celebrations. Julianne looked as though she might faint. My father tried one last time. Those are accounting mistakes. The accountant answered without emotion. Accounting mistakes generally don't repeat themselves across hundreds of transactions. No one defended him, not the investors, not the politicians, not even the attorney who had advised him to cooperate. My mother finally found her voice. This can't possibly justify ruining our family. General Crawford looked at her calmly. Mrs. Westbrook, no federal employee entered this home intending to ruin your family. He gestured toward the evidence boxes. These documents created today's outcome. His words landed with a weight that nobody could argue against. Outside, new headlights swept across the front driveway. Unlike the military vehicles, these belonged to local law enforcement. Several marked cruisers rolled through the estate gates one after another. Blue emergency lights flashed silently across the ballroom ceiling. Guests immediately stepped away from the windows. One television reporter whispered into his microphone, "They're here." Within moments, the front entrance opened again. The county sheriff entered first. Behind him came detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit, followed by 2 federal agents wearing Department of Justice credentials. The sheriff removed his hat respectfully as he approached General Crawford. General. Sheriff. We've reviewed the emergency referral. General Crawford handed him a sealed packet. Evidence chain remains intact. The sheriff signed the transfer form. His detective accepted 3 evidence containers from the compliance team. Everything followed procedure, no shouting, no dramatic accusations, just paperwork. Ironically, paperwork was exactly what my father had spent years dismissing. The sheriff opened the first page of another folder. He read silently for nearly a minute before looking up. Mr. Franklin Westbrook. My father straightened his jacket again. I'll have my attorney. You'll have that opportunity. The sheriff unfolded the document. I have warrants issued by the United States District Court. The ballroom became so quiet, I could hear someone set down a champagne glass. The sheriff continued. Franklin Westbrook. He looked directly at my father. You are under arrest for suspected federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, embezzlement, and related financial offenses pending formal charging. My father's face drained of color. This is insane. The sheriff remained professional. Please place your hands where I can see them. My mother rushed forward. There has to be some mistake. A federal agent stepped toward her. Mrs. Westbrook. She froze. You are also named within the warrant package relating to financial participation and conspiracy. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Julianne backed away instinctively. No. She shook her head repeatedly. No, no, no. One detective addressed her directly. Julianne Westbrook. She immediately looked toward the ballroom doors as if calculating whether escape was possible. 2 deputies had already positioned themselves there. The detective continued. You are under arrest for suspected wire fraud, financial conspiracy, money laundering-related offenses subject to federal prosecution, and attempted extortion involving an active-duty military officer. The final charge hit the room harder than the financial crimes. One of the county commissioners quietly whispered, she tried to extort her own sister. Another guest answered, an army captain. Someone else muttered, good Lord. Julianne pointed directly at me. She made all of this happen. I met her eyes. No, my voice remained steady. You did. You reported me. I reported what happened. You're destroying us. I slowly shook my head. The truth did that. She had no answer. One deputy stepped behind my father. Sir, please turn around. My father looked toward the guests filling the ballroom. Many had attended his charity dinners. Many had sought his political endorsements. Many had accepted expensive gifts over the years. Not one person stepped forward. Influence disappears quickly when federal badges enter the room. He looked toward the county commissioner. The commissioner lowered his eyes, then toward one of his longtime business partners. The man quietly stepped backward. Finally, toward the attorney. The attorney gave a tiny, almost apologetic shake of his head. There was nothing left to negotiate. My father slowly turned around. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom, a sound I had heard before during military investigations. It always sounded final. A second pair clicked around my mother's wrists. She quietly began crying, not loudly, just enough for the people closest to hear. Julianne resisted only briefly. This is humiliating, one detective answered. I imagine it is. The cuffs locked into place. Camera flashes erupted almost instantly. Several local journalists who had arrived after hearing helicopters were now documenting everything. Flash, flash, flash. One photographer captured the entire family standing together. Not for a celebration, for an arrest. Nearly 150 guests watched without speaking. The same people who had applauded my father's speech less than an hour earlier now stood motionless, unwilling to make eye contact with anyone wearing handcuffs. General Crawford stepped beside me. You holding up all right, Captain? Yes, sir, he studied my expression. This isn't easy. No, it rarely is. I watched deputies escort my parents toward the front entrance. My mother looked back once, not with anger, not even with sadness, more like someone finally realizing that years of choices eventually become consequences. Julianne didn't look back at all. She kept staring at the floor. As they reached the doorway, my father stopped walking for just a moment. He turned toward me. For years I had waited for him to say he was proud of me, or that he understood, or simply that he had been wrong. Instead, he said nothing. The deputy gently guided him forward. The front doors closed behind them. The ballroom remained filled with expensive suits, crystal chandeliers, and half-finished champagne. But without the illusion they had all been protecting, it suddenly felt like nothing more than a very expensive empty room. I tightened my grip on the small ring of keys as the transport aircraft taxied slowly across the Norfolk flight line. 3 weeks had changed almost everything. The Department of Defense officially approved the first phase of my research program 48 hours after General Crawford delivered the funding directive. The trust my grandfather had built was finally released is exactly as intended, and every dollar moved into federally supervised research accounts. I never touched the money personally. I never could. That had always been the point. The project belonged to the mission, not to me. Our development team had already grown from 12 researchers to 31. Engineers, trauma surgeons, logistics analysts, software architects, procurement specialists, and Army medical planners now worked in the secure facility. For the first time in 5 years, nobody was asking whether the program deserved to exist. They were asking how quickly we could deploy it. The answer mattered. Because somewhere, another medic would eventually wait for blood that hadn't arrived yet. Another operating room would need supplies before someone realized they were running low. If we succeeded, those shortages would become less common. That was worth every difficult day. A salty breeze rolled across the tarmac. The Atlantic always smelled different from anywhere else I'd served. Cleaner, sharper, almost honest. Behind me, a maintenance crew guided another aircraft toward its parking position, while cargo handlers secured pallets inside a waiting transport plane. Nobody here cared about expensive watches. Nobody asked what neighborhood you lived in. People judged you by whether the aircraft launched on time and whether the equipment arrived where it was supposed to. I appreciated that. General Crawford walked toward me carrying 2 coffee cups. I guessed you hadn't eaten breakfast. I owe you one, sir. You owe me results. He handed me the coffee. I prefer that payment. I smiled. Fair enough. We stood quietly for a few moments watching crews finish their pre-flight inspections. Finally, he spoke. The audit is moving forward. I read the update. Your father's legal team requested another continuance. I'm not surprised. They won't stop the evidence. I know. He looked at me carefully. You've barely asked about the case. I've read everything I need to read. That wasn't entirely true. I knew enough. Federal prosecutors had filed formal charges. The financial investigation continued expanding. Several business associates had accepted plea agreements in exchange for cooperation. The rest would unfold inside courtrooms, where facts mattered more than family stories. That chapter no longer belonged to me. General Crawford nodded slowly. That's probably healthy. I spent too many years trying to earn approval that was never available. And now, I looked toward the aircraft. Now I have work. He laughed quietly. Your grandfather used to answer questions exactly like that. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. He checked his watch. They're boarding in 10 minutes. I'll be there. After I walked away, I reached into my jacket pocket. The brass key rested beside another small key ring, house keys, garage key, mailbox key. Everything my parents had once insisted represented belonging. After the arrests, their attorney had mailed them to me with a short note requesting that I remove any remaining personal property from the estate. There wasn't much. A few uniforms, some books, my grandmother's quilt. Everything fit inside 2 military duffel bags. The rest had never really been mine. I turned the keys over in my hand. As a little girl, I thought this house meant security. As a teenager, I thought leaving it meant failure. As an adult, I finally understood something much simpler. A building isn't a home just because your name is connected to it. And approval isn't love simply because it comes from family. My grandfather had to teach me that years ago. I hadn't fully understood until now. A trash container stood beside the boarding stairs for discarded coffee cups and packaging. I walked over, looked at the keys one last time. There wasn't any anger left, no dramatic speech, no victory, just clarity. I dropped the entire key ring into the trash. The metal landed with a soft clink beneath a stack of paper cups. That sound closed a chapter I'd been carrying for most of my life. A loadmaster called from the aircraft. Captain Westbrook, we're ready. I'm coming. I climbed the boarding ramp without looking back. Inside, the aircraft smelled like hydraulic fluid, canvas straps, and fresh cargo netting. Oddly enough, it felt familiar, comfortable. I secured my gear, fastened the harness, and settled beside a small round window. As the engines accelerated, the runway blurred beneath us. Norfolk grew smaller. The coastline stretched into the distance. Clouds opened across the horizon. For years, I believed freedom would arrive the moment someone in my family finally admitted my worth. I was wrong. Freedom arrived the moment I stopped asking people to measure something they had never bothered to understand. My parents valued appearances. My grandfather valued service. One left me chasing approval. The other left me a purpose. Purpose lasts longer. If this story leaves you with anything, I hope it's this. Never let someone else's opinion become the price of your own dignity. Family can shape your beginning, but it doesn't get to write your ending. Respect isn't something you beg for. It grows from living with integrity, honoring your commitments, and refusing to trade your values for acceptance. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't getting even. It's choosing the road that lets you sleep peacefully because you never abandoned who you are. And if someone keeps telling you that your work, your dreams, or your service don't matter, remember this. Your value has never been determined by the loudest voice in the room. It's determined by what you build, who you help, and what remains after the applause disappears. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, I realized I wasn't flying away from my past. I was finally flying toward my own future. Before you leave, take a look at the story waiting for you on your screen. It's one of the channel's most unforgettable family betrayals, and the ending surprises almost everyone who watches it. Once you see how that family unraveled, you'll understand why so many viewers recommend it to others.